In the opulent city of Dubai, where gold flows like water and every corner hides a secret, the most expensive wedding of 2024 was taking place. A celebration that would become one of the city's most infamous tragedies. The ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel glittered with luxury. 500 guests dressed to the nines, champagne flowing, and the air humming with anticipation. For a brief, dazzling 14 hours, it appeared to be the perfect event, a fairy tale come to life in the heart of Dubai. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the facade began to crack, and a disturbing truth emerged. By dawn, the bride was dead, and the groom had vanished, leaving behind a trail of blood, deceit, and shattered perfection. The $500,000 celebration that had seemed like the pinnacle of tradition and honor had turned into a twisted crime scene, and the police were left piecing together a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. Here's the twist the authorities didn't know yet. This wasn't a crime of passion. No, it was much more calculated, carefully orchestrated years in advance. Every step, every detail had been set into motion long before the guests arrived at the wedding, and shockingly, the victim was right where she was supposed to be. The story begins not on the wedding night, but 2 years earlier with a man named Ahmed, a name soon to be synonymous with manipulation, obsession, and a plan so twisted that no one, not even the bride, could foresee it. Ahmed, 31 years old, had become one of Dubai's most powerful real estate developers by the time he was 25. His wealth, earned from a combination of his own entrepreneurial ventures and his family's legacy in one of Dubai's oldest merchant dynasties, allowed him access to the most exclusive circles of the city. To the world, he was the perfect Emirati gentleman. Respectful to elders, generous to friends, and always impeccably dressed in tailored suits. He was admired by his peers and respected by his elders. He lived his life by the traditional codes of the Emirati aristocracy, seeming to embody the values of honor, loyalty, and family. But behind the polished exterior lay a darker truth, a secret obsession that, if anyone knew, would shatter the carefully crafted image of the man who had everything. Ahmed's true focus wasn't on real estate, luxury, or the ideal life that others assumed he had. It was something far more disturbing: women. In the privacy of his study, far away from the prying eyes of his family and friends, Ahmed kept a collection of journals. Not just any journals, but meticulously detailed records of women's lives. Specifically, their pasts. He called them purity investigations. For 3 years, Ahmed ran a private campaign to expose what he believed were the lies and immoral actions of the modern, educated women around him. He didn't just want to settle down with a woman. He wanted to expose them, humiliate them, and cleanse Dubai of what he saw as the moral corruption creeping into his society. He had already ruined the lives of 3 women before Isla. He had no remorse for the emotional devastation he caused, only a sense of superiority that he was doing a necessary service, protecting tradition and purging the city of impurity. His method was always the same. He would find women who appeared to be the epitome of modern success. Educated, independent, accomplished, but with past relationships or histories that he believed were impure. Ahmed had a network of private investigators who would follow these women, gathering information, recording their private lives, infiltrating their social circles through fake profiles, and collecting evidence. If they had past lovers, secret affairs, or anything that could be labeled as a blemish on their purity, he would expose them to the public. It wasn't about revenge for Ahmed. It was about cleansing his community. He saw himself as a guardian of tradition, willing to destroy a woman's life for the sake of purity. To him, it was a righteous mission, an act of divine justice. His obsession with exposing women wasn't just personal. It was a crusade. And with each woman he ruined, he grew more obsessed, more meticulous, and more dangerous. But as we know, things rarely go as planned. Ahmed's latest target, Isla, was different from his previous victims. She wasn't just some woman who could be easily manipulated. Isla had a past, yes, but she also had the strength, intelligence, and resolve to fight back. Ahmed's obsession with her would soon lead him down a dark path, a path that would spiral out of control. And in a cruel twist of fate, Ahmed didn't realize that Ayla wasn't the helpless victim he thought she was. She was just as calculated and determined as he was. Ayla was a 26-year-old international business graduate, fluent in 4 languages, and the daughter of a respected government official in Dubai. To anyone looking from the outside, she seemed like the perfect match for any family wanting to ensure their status in society. She was beautiful, intelligent, and poised. A woman of the future, living the life that seemed destined for success. But beneath her flawless exterior, Ayla carried a heavy secret, one that threatened to unravel everything she had worked for. During her years at university in London, Ayla had fallen deeply in love with a classmate. It was a relationship that seemed innocent at the time, 2 young people finding each other in the vast expanse of a foreign city. They spent 2 beautiful years together, and Ayla's feelings for him grew stronger with each passing day. But love, as often is the case, was not enough to overcome the pressures of tradition. Her lover had returned to his home country, and his family had arranged a marriage for him, as was customary. Ayla was left heartbroken, unable to fully heal from the pain of losing someone she believed she would spend her life with. For months, Ayla moved forward, focusing on her career, her education, and the family who depended on her. But as she focused on building her future, something strange began happening, something that made her blood run cold. Anonymous messages started appearing in her inbox, messages that contained disturbing photographs of her with her university boyfriend. Along with the photos came screenshots of private conversations they had shared, conversations that should have been long buried in the past. The texts were blunt and chilling. "I know who you really are." At first, she dismissed it as a sick prank. Maybe it was her ex-boyfriend trying to rekindle their past relationship, or perhaps someone from her university days who had too much time on their hands. But as the messages continued to arrive, becoming increasingly detailed and threatening, Ayla realized that she was being stalked. Someone had been watching her every move, following her like a ghost from her past. The anxiety grew as the days went by, each new message more unsettling than the last. When the marriage proposal came from Ahmed's family, Ayla's heart sank. This wasn't just any proposal, it was a trap. After conducting her own investigation, Ayla discovered the horrifying truth. Ahmed wasn't a stranger trying to woo her into a traditional marriage. He was the stalker behind the anonymous messages. The surveillance, the photos, the intimate knowledge of her life. It was all him. The revelation was a shock that rattled her to the core. How could a man who seemed so charming, so respectful, be hiding such a twisted obsession? But now, Ayla was facing a terrifying question. Why did he want to marry her? Was this just another way to humiliate her, to expose her past to the world? Or was there something far darker at play? Despite the fear and anxiety swirling within her, Ayla made a fateful decision. She would marry Ahmed, but she would do so on her own terms. She wouldn't be a passive victim in this game. She would take control. If he thought he could destroy her, he was gravely mistaken. She would be ready to strike back. However, Ayla had no idea how much the stakes had already risen. This wasn't just a battle between a man and a woman. It was a war between 2 families, both trapped in webs of lies and desperation. Neither family was as innocent as they seemed. And what Ayla didn't yet realize was that, in her attempt to protect herself, she was walking straight into the deadliest trap Ahmed had ever set. As Ayla prepared for the wedding, she began to see the intricate web of lies that both she and Ahmed had been caught in. But what she didn't know yet was that the real trap was much larger than her own personal battle. While Ahmed was meticulously planning his humiliation of Ayla, his family was simultaneously in a state of chaos that he could not ignore. Ahmed's family was desperate. His father, once a powerful figure in Dubai's real estate industry, had built his empire through corruption and illegal land deals. But now the empire was crumbling. The family's wealth was tied to dirty money, and they needed connections, legitimate, powerful connections, to escape the impending storm. Without these connections, they would be left exposed and vulnerable to prosecution. But the answer to their financial crisis lay in a union with Ayla's family, whose influence in the government would act as a shield for their criminal activities. Ahmed's family saw the marriage as a business deal, not a union of two souls. They needed Isla's father's influence to protect them from the consequences of their actions. They weren't concerned about Ahmed's happiness, nor about Isla's well-being. They were solely focused on their own survival. But in their desperation to secure a prosperous future, they had turned a blind eye to the emotional wreckage that their children would suffer. On the other side, Isla's family was no less desperate. Her father, once a high-ranking government official, was now facing bankruptcy. His wife's ongoing battle with cancer had drained their finances, and debts were mounting to the point where the family's reputation, power, and status in Dubai were at risk. For them, this marriage wasn't just about tradition, it was about survival. Layla's father had long relied on his connections to protect his career, but now those connections were more crucial than ever. He saw in Ahmed's family the potential to resolve his financial troubles. This marriage, in his eyes, would restore the balance. And so, when Ahmed approached him with the proposal, Layla's father jumped at the chance. Both families saw the wedding as a way to preserve their status, and neither cared about the emotional well-being of their children. What they didn't realize was that their desperation had led them into a carefully constructed game of manipulation that would spiral beyond their control. Ahmed and Isla were mere pawns in a much larger chess match, with stakes so high that their fates were already sealed, even before they had agreed to marry. Behind the facade of tradition and honor, both families were living in the shadow of their secrets. Neither one was pure in their motives, and both were willing to sacrifice their children to save their own skins. As Ahmed's plans unfolded and Isla grew more wary, neither of them realized just how much they were being used. The wedding wasn't a symbol of love. It was a calculated maneuver, a trap that both families had set in motion. Yet, as the wedding drew closer, the pressure mounted on both sides. Ahmed's obsession with exposing Isla had taken on a life of its own. His personal vendetta now intertwined with his family's desires for survival, and Isla's determination to expose him grew more intense by the day. In a world where everyone was playing their own game, no one was prepared for the devastating collision that would happen on the wedding night. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and Dubai's most exclusive hotel was transformed into a magnificent spectacle. The guests, unaware of the manipulation and dark undercurrents brewing beneath the glittering surface, entered the grand ballroom. Every detail had been carefully choreographed. The golden chandeliers, the extravagant floral arrangements, the glistening silverware. Everything looked perfect. Ahmed stood at the entrance, playing his role flawlessly. His hands were steady as he shook hands with dignitaries and received congratulations from well-wishers. He smiled politely, never letting his eyes stray too far from Isla, the woman he had spent 2 years studying, manipulating, and planning to publicly expose. His role as the perfect groom seemed effortless, and to the guests, he appeared exactly as he wanted them to see him, nervous but excited, a traditional man stepping into his new life. Isla, on the other hand, was equally convincing in her performance. She walked down the aisle with grace, eyes lowered modestly as was expected, smiling shyly at the right moments. She signed the marriage contract with trembling hands, which to the guests was simply a sign of wedding jitters. But to Isla, that trembling was not out of fear. It was the adrenaline pumping through her veins, knowing that she was playing a dangerous game too. Hidden under her wedding dress was a small recording device, capturing every conversation, every moment of the ceremony, and every piece of the elaborate facade Ahmed had spent years constructing. Both families beamed with pride, each believing they had secured their future. Layla's father saw this marriage as a path to government protection, while Ahmed's family thought they had gained political connections and legitimacy. But in truth, neither family realized the true war taking place beneath the surface. The marriage, to them, was a way to protect their financial empires and social status. But for Isla and Ahmed, it was about something much darker: destruction. As the night wore on, traditional drums echoed in the ballroom, marking the height of the celebration. The ancient rituals were a beautiful contrast to the modern psychological warfare happening between the bride and groom. But for all the celebration, the tension in the air was palpable. Each moment, each smile, each word exchanged was calculated, measured, and part of the high-stakes battle they were both preparing to face. As the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The guests were ushered to the after-party, leaving the newlyweds alone in their suite on the hotel's top floor. Rose petals scattered across the floor and champagne chilled in crystal buckets, but the gilded fantasy ended as the door closed behind them. Inside the presidential suite, Ahmed's mask began to slip. The respectful groom he had played so well vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating version of himself. He walked towards his suitcase, pulling out a thick manila folder and a stack of photographs. "I know who you really are," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Isla's blood ran cold as she saw the photos, the ones from her university days with her ex-boyfriend. He had gathered every scrap of her past, from private conversations to photographs. He had built a meticulous case against her. "You thought you could deceive me," Ahmed continued with righteous fury. "But I've been watching you. I've been documenting everything. Now everyone will know who you really are." Isla stood there in shock, her face pale, exactly as Ahmed had imagined. But just as he expected her to break down, she did something that shattered his world. She smiled, calmly, confidently. "I know," she said simply. "I knew it was you all along." Ahmed went pale, unable to believe what he was hearing. Isla reached into her wedding dress and pulled out her own phone, showing him a recording app that had been running all night. "I've been documenting you, Ahmed," she said, her voice steady and filled with quiet rage. "I've been recording everything. I know about Sarah, about Fatima, about New." She named the other victims he had destroyed. "I have everything. And tomorrow, every news outlet in Dubai will know exactly what kind of monster you are." The smugness that had been radiating from Ahmed faltered. The hunter was now the hunted. His meticulous plans for humiliation had backfired. He was standing face to face with someone who had played him at his own game. But his realization came too late. His rage, combined with his shattered ego, would ignite a violent confrontation that neither of them could have anticipated. The tension that had been building throughout the night finally erupted in a way no one could have predicted. Ahmed, now consumed by a rage that surpassed anything he had ever felt before, saw the quiet smile on Isla's face as a personal betrayal. He had spent 2 years planning, manipulating, and scheming to bring her to this moment, to expose her, to break her. But here she was, standing strong, victorious in her own way, having outplayed him at his own game. In his mind, the only way to reclaim control was through violence. His hands, which had once been steady and calculated, now trembled with an intensity he could no longer suppress. The confrontation turned physical within seconds, as Ahmed lunged toward Isla in a desperate attempt to silence her. He grabbed her by the throat, his fingers pressing against her delicate skin. The room, once filled with luxury and celebration, now felt like a prison, trapping both of them in a violent struggle. Isla fought back with all the strength she could muster. She wasn't the fragile woman Ahmed thought she was. Her body may have been smaller, but her resolve was ironclad. Her hands clawed at his, trying to free herself from his suffocating grip. But in his blind fury, Ahmed was too strong, too consumed by his need to assert dominance. His hands tightened, cutting off her air supply, and for a moment, it seemed like this would be the end. But just as quickly as it had started, the struggle stopped. The fight drained from Isla as her vision blurred and her breath grew shallow. Ahmed's anger was too powerful, and though she tried to gasp for air, her body began to weaken. The once proud and fierce woman now lay there, struggling to hold on. In the chaos, her phone, still recording, slipped from her hand, landing on the marble floor with a hollow clink. The device continued to capture the final moments of her fight for survival. The room, once buzzing with the sounds of a celebration, fell eerily silent. Ahmed, breathing heavily, realized that something had changed. He stood over her, his rage now replaced by a cold realization of what he had just done. But even in his twisted mind, he still felt justified. He had been doing God's work, hadn't he? He had cleansed Dubai of the impurity he believed threatened everything he valued. But in that moment, it became clear that there was no returning from this. The twisted game he had set in motion had spiraled out of his control. The wedding, the perfect performance, had ended in bloodshed, but it was only the beginning of the fallout. And as the night wore on, a different kind of reckoning was unfolding. Both of them had become victims of their own twisted desires. Ahmed's mind was now unraveling. The psychological battle he had waged on Ayla had turned into his worst nightmare. He had not only lost, but in the process, he had destroyed everything. His mind had fractured under the weight of his own obsession, and the reality of what he had just done was beginning to dawn on him. The woman he had tried to ruin was now dead, and his carefully constructed world was collapsing. As Ayla lay lifeless on the floor, Ahmed's thoughts were consumed with one question. Had he won, or had he lost everything? But even as the truth of his actions began to sink in, the room fell silent once again, broken only by the sound of his own breathing and the faint whir of the recording device. The truth was now forever captured, on a phone, in his actions, and in the blood that stained the luxurious carpet beneath them. As the sun began to rise over the city of Dubai, the once glamorous wedding had been reduced to a twisted crime scene. The luxurious suite, which had once been filled with laughter, dancing, and dreams of a perfect life, now echoed only with the sound of silence, deep and unsettling. The blood, the shattered illusion of a perfect union, and the chaos that Ahmed and Ayla had created were about to be discovered by the world, but it was too late for any redemption. When the Dubai police arrived at the scene, they expected to find a typical domestic dispute that had escalated into violence. But what they uncovered was nothing short of a psychological horror show. The suite, still strewn with the remnants of the wedding celebration, champagne glasses, rose petals, and half-eaten cake, hid the true story beneath a carefully constructed facade. As the officers stepped inside, their eyes immediately fell on the two phones still recording, capturing the twisted truth of what had transpired. Ahmed's attempt at humiliation, his sick obsession with exposing Ayla's past, and his plan to control her had spiraled out of control in the worst possible way. As the officers went through the suite, they found the documents, Ahmed's surveillance files, his psychological profiles of Ayla, and his plans to systematically destroy her. Each page painted a chilling portrait of a man consumed by a desire to purify the women he deemed impure. But alongside his files were Ayla's own documents, her counter-investigation, her recordings, and the case she had meticulously built against him. It was clear now, neither of them were truly victims. Both had been predators, driven by their own twisted desires to control and destroy. The phones that lay on the floor were more than just evidence of a crime. They were the recorded confessions of two people whose lives had become intertwined in a deadly game of manipulation. Each recording was a silent testament to the psychological warfare that had been waged in secret over 2 years. The dark truth of their marriage, the lies, the deceit, and the self-destruction they had both caused were now laid bare for the world to see. But the repercussions of the murder didn't stop there. As the investigation unfolded, the shockwaves reached far beyond the presidential suite. Ahmed's family, once considered pillars of Dubai's elite, were quickly exposed as deeply corrupt. His family's real estate empire, built on illegal land deals, government bribery, and financial fraud, was now under investigation. Ahmed's mother, once the face of elegance and respectability, was revealed to have spent thousands each month maintaining her addiction to prescription drugs. His father, whose public image had been that of a successful business magnate, was now linked to a network of criminal activities that had kept the family afloat for decades. And then there was Layla's family. Despite her father's respected government position, he was revealed to be at the center of a massive corruption scandal. His debts, hidden beneath the facade of his role in Dubai's elite, had been mounting for years, and the wedding had been nothing more than a desperate attempt to save himself. The marriage of Ahmed and Ayla, once seen as the perfect union of tradition and wealth, was nothing but a business transaction between two families in ruin. The story of the wedding, of the supposed union of two people in love, had become a tragedy, a case that exposed the darkest secrets of both families. As the investigation went deeper, more victims came forward, women who had fallen prey to Ahmed's cruel manipulation. Sarah, a former teacher, described how Ahmed had destroyed her career and reputation by spreading false rumors about her relationships. Fatima, a successful businesswoman, recounted the months of psychological torture she had endured at the hands of Ahmed before his public exposure of her past sent her into a spiral of despair. New, a journalist who had fled Dubai after being harassed for months, spoke of how Ahmed had used fake social media accounts to stalk her and ruin her life. Each of these women had been systematically targeted, their reputations destroyed, their lives torn apart, all because Ahmed saw them as impure. But what they hadn't realized was that they were part of something larger, a network of manipulation, control, and destruction. Ahmed's obsession with purifying women had started with small targets but had grown into something far more dangerous. The murder of Ayla, though tragic, had halted what could have been a far-reaching campaign against educated, independent women in Dubai. As the truth began to emerge, both families were left to face the consequences of their actions. The damage was done not just to Ayla but to everyone involved. What had begun as a twisted game of psychological warfare between Ahmed and Ayla had become the catalyst for a much larger scandal, one that would shake the foundations of Dubai's elite society. The morning after the murder, Dubai's glittering skyline stood as an ironic contrast to the chaos and destruction that had unfolded within the walls of a luxury hotel. As the investigation continued to unfold, it became clear that this wasn't just another tragic domestic case. This was the breaking point of a long-simmering societal issue. The lies, the manipulation, and the twisted views on tradition had created an environment where power and control over women were justified by twisted beliefs about purity, honor, and the sanctity of family. The police had initially thought they were dealing with an isolated case of domestic violence gone tragically wrong. What they uncovered, however, was a much deeper and more disturbing tale of psychological torture, systemic corruption, and the dark side of tradition. As officers combed through the presidential suite, they found more than just the aftermath of a bloody struggle. They found the story of two broken people, each playing their own dangerous game, each believing they were justified in their actions. Ahmed, the self-appointed guardian of tradition, had used his wealth, power, and manipulation to destroy not only Ayla's life, but also those of countless women before her. His obsession with controlling women, exposing their pasts, and purifying them had taken him to the brink of madness. But as disturbing as Ahmed's actions were, the full scope of the tragedy was just beginning to be revealed. Through the investigation, the police discovered that Ahmed had created a network of like-minded men who shared his twisted view of women. They were recruited to spy on, stalk, and destroy the reputations of women who didn't fit Ahmed's narrow vision of purity. But even more shocking was the revelation that Ahmed's manipulations weren't isolated to just Ayla. His previous victims, 3 women who had been systematically ruined and driven out of Dubai, were brought into the light. Their testimonies were gut-wrenching. Stories of psychological abuse, social isolation, and the destruction of careers and families. Women who had once been successful, educated, and confident had been reduced to mere shells of themselves by the ruthless actions of a man who saw them as nothing more than objects to be controlled. The courtroom trial that followed shook the city to its core. The media descended on Dubai, drawn to the sensational story of a man who had been able to use the city's values of honor, respect, and tradition to hide his monstrous actions. For weeks, the trial became the focal point of international news. Ahmed's defense was as predictable as it was disturbing. His lawyers argued that his actions had been driven by a belief that he was protecting society from the dangers of deceptive women, those who were pretending to be pure while hiding their pasts. They claimed that Ahmed's actions were a result of his upbringing in a society in transition, where the old values were being replaced by modern ones. But the prosecution's case was equally devastating. The evidence was overwhelming. Ahmed's surveillance files, his private investigator, and the psychological profiles he had created were presented to the court. The courtroom fell silent as the full extent of his actions was revealed. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Ahmed's previous victims took the stand. They testified about the years of psychological torment they had endured and how their lives had been destroyed by Ahmed's campaign of terror. The testimony from these women was a powerful reminder of the damage one man could cause when he was allowed to manipulate and control the lives of others. As the trial continued, it became clear that the true scope of the corruption was far greater than anyone had initially realized. Ahmed's family, once seen as pillars of Dubai's elite, were revealed to be deeply entrenched in financial fraud, illegal land deals, and government corruption. His father, a once respected business magnate, was exposed for his involvement in a vast money-laundering operation, while his mother's prescription drug addiction had been hidden behind a facade of high-society elegance. The media coverage of the trial forced the city to confront the uncomfortable truth about the elite families who had been manipulating the system for decades. Layla's family, too, was implicated in the scandal. Her father, a respected government official, was revealed to be involved in a massive bribery scheme, using his influence to cover up financial troubles and protect his family from prosecution. The truth came out that the marriage between Ahmed and Ayla had been more about survival than love. Two families using each other to stay afloat in a world where power and connections mattered more than anything else. The wedding, once thought to be the perfect union, was revealed to be a business transaction between two corrupt families. The money, the connections, the power, it was all a carefully calculated game of survival, with no regard for the well-being of the bride and groom. What was supposed to be a celebration of tradition and honor had turned into a trap set by two families who were more concerned with their own survival than the lives of their children. As the investigation continued to unfold, the ripple effects of the trial began to shake Dubai's elite. Social media platforms, once used as tools for manipulation, now became a battleground for women's rights activists who were determined to expose the culture of control and abuse that had allowed men like Ahmed to thrive. The case sparked a fierce public debate about the role of tradition in modern society, with women's advocacy groups demanding change and conservative voices defending the status quo. The case forced Dubai to confront uncomfortable questions about itself. How many other women had been silently destroyed by men who believed they were protecting traditional values? How many families had prioritized reputation over their children's safety? How many people had looked the other way while systematic abuse occurred in their social circles? The murder of Ayla had been a turning point, not just for her family, but for the entire city. The question that remained was whether Dubai would learn from this tragedy or return to the silence that had enabled such horrors in the first place. As the trial of Ahmed concluded, the ripples of its impact spread far beyond the courtroom, altering the very fabric of Dubai's society. The once glittering facade of wealth, power, and tradition cracked open, exposing the dark underbelly of corruption, manipulation, and abuse. The tragic story of Ayla and Ahmed had shattered not only their lives but also the lives of countless others, forcing the city to confront its deepest, most uncomfortable truths. Ahmed's conviction for first-degree murder was a necessary step toward justice, but it was only the beginning. For Dubai and other societies where tradition often masks exploitation, this case served as a powerful reminder of the dangers that lie when honor and tradition are weaponized to control and silence the vulnerable. The testimony of his victims, the exposure of both families' corruption, and the underlying social issues brought to light were a call to action for change. As the dust settled, one question remained. Would Dubai truly learn from this tragedy, or would it return to the silence that allowed such darkness to fester? The future of women's rights in Dubai, the fight for dignity and respect, and the dismantling of harmful traditions now rested in the hands of a society forced to reckon with its own reflection. But change was on the horizon. Ayla's younger sister, inspired by her late sister's courage, set the foundation in Ayla's memory, working tirelessly to protect women from the kind of harassment that had claimed her sister's life. And as new laws aimed at preventing psychological abuse, stalking, and coercion came into effect, it was clear that the murder of Ayla had, in a tragic sense, sparked the beginning of a new era in Dubai's fight for justice. The world was watching. The story of a glamorous wedding gone tragically wrong had become a turning point, a moment in history when society could either evolve or remain complicit in its broken systems. This story is a stark reminder that no amount of wealth or power can hide the darkest secrets for long. It calls upon us all to challenge the systems that protect abusers, and to create societies where honor truly means dignity and respect for all individuals. If you found this story shocking and thought-provoking, take a moment to reflect on the societal structures in your own community. Stand with victims. Speak out against manipulation and injustice. And most importantly, let us remember that real change begins with awareness. Don't forget to subscribe, share this story with your circle, and join us in the fight to ensure that the silence that once protected the guilty is never allowed to return.